At the beginning of the 18th century, what is today the TransMississippi United States consisted of three political regions, each controlled by a foreign power. By early in the 20th century, those areas were part of the United States and were broken into 22 political divisions, with the borders being essentially as they are today. The changes that occurred over that time are fascinating and are the subject of our Shaping the American West series of YouTube lectures. Period maps provide a unique perspective on this topic, for they show us the political situation in the country in, as it were, real time, as the borders were drawn and redrawn, even when the borders lasted for just a short time. These lectures will look at the shaping of the American West using original maps from the period to help illustrate this complex subject. As we saw in the first lecture in this series, in 1844, the Trans-Mississippi United States consisted of the lands acquired in 1803 through the Louisiana Purchase. In the following 3 decades, these lands have been divided into smaller political units. These consisted of 4 organized entities along the Mississippi River, 2 states, Louisiana and Missouri, and 2 territories, Arkansas and Iowa. The rest of the original purchase, up to the Continental Divide, was unorganized territory supposedly set aside for Native Americans. This second lecture in the Shaping of the American West series will consider the years between 1845 and 1848. During those years, the country added about half again as much land to its dominion. This was the last large enlargement of the continental United States. By 1848, the country had close to its current borders in North America. So let's look at the expansion of the United States in these momentous 4 years. This took place in 2 parts, one in the Northwest and one in the Southwest. In the Southwest, it involved the acquisition of Mexican lands. The original border between Mexico and the Louisiana Purchase was the Continental Divide with the modifications established by the Adams-Onis Treaty of 1819. The borders in the south followed a zigzag line determined by rivers and longitudinal lines. The northern border limited Spanish authority to lands below the 42nd parallel. The first change to these borders was in the Mexican province of Texas. In 1821, when Mexico achieved independence from Spain, the northern provinces of Texas, New Mexico, and Alta California were very sparsely populated. In 1823, Mexico, in hopes of strengthening her position in the north, let Stephen F. Austin set up a colony of Americans in the province of Texas. Tensions between the Mexican government and the American colonists began to escalate in the 1830s, leading to an outbreak of fighting in late 1835 after Santa Anna overthrew the Mexican Constitution and set up a dictatorship. By 1836, the Texans had won their independence and set up the Republic of Texas. Right from the beginning, many Texans wanted Texas to be annexed into the United States, but even more importantly, many Southerners in the United States wanted to annex Texas. This desire was driven to a great extent because of the Missouri Compromise of 1820. As we saw in the first lecture in this series, this compromise established that, with the exception of Missouri, no slavery would be allowed north of the 36° 30' latitude line. Pro-slavery Southerners had looked at the map of the United States and saw how much of the territory in the country that was open for new states lay north of that parallel, compared to what was available for new slave states below the line. Thus, many in the South wanted to add Texas to the United States, for it would add a large area that was open to slavery. In any case, in 1845, Texas was admitted as a new state. This annexation outraged Mexico, which had never accepted Texas independence, and this increased tensions along the disputed border. In 1846, war resulted, but in less than a year and a half, the Mexican Republic had to sue for an unfavorable peace. This resulted in the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo on February 2, 1848, in which Mexico received $18 million, and in return, the United States received undisputed control of Texas, and in addition, the United States also added other lands from northern Mexico, consisting of the provinces of Alta California and New Mexico. This acquisition is called the Mexican Cession, and it increased the size of the United States by about 20%. The second major addition to the United States in the years between 1845 and 1848 took place in the Pacific Northwest. From the beginning of the century, there were conflicting claims in this region by the Spanish, Russians, British, and Americans. By 1818, only the British and American claims remained to any significant degree. The British were in there with the Hudson's Bay Company network of trading routes and forts. The Americans claimed the area because of Robert Gray's discovery of the Columbia River in 1792 and the Louisiana Purchase. But mostly the Americans wanted the area to provide them with an outlet to the Pacific. A treaty in 1818 between Great Britain and the United States set the 49th parallel as the border between British Canada and the United States from west of Lake of the Woods to the Rocky Mountains. West of the Rockies, it created joint control of the so-called Oregon country, which was then relatively unsettled. This joint control, of course, didn't work. The Hudson Bay Company aggressively fought against U.S. fur traders moving into the region. Meanwhile, American settlers began to arrive in the late 1830s along the Oregon Trail, culminating in the Great Migration of 1843. In order to avoid war, both countries needed to reach an agreement. Thus, in 1846, the Oregon Treaty extended the British-American border along the 49th parallel all the way to the Pacific, which they probably should have done back in 1818. This created the Oregon Territory, lying between British North America and the newly acquired Mexican Cession and extending from the Continental Divide to the Pacific Ocean. So, to summarize, between 1845 and 1848, the United States was officially established as a transcontinental nation by adding the final third of its continental territory. Just before mid-century, the TransMississippi American West consisted of a series of states and territories along the Mississippi River, the state of Texas in the southwest, a large Oregon territory in the northwest, two ex-Mexican provinces, Alta California and New Mexico, and the vast region in the middle of these, which was mostly unorganized territory set aside for Native Americans. These 4 years, from 1845 to 1848, gave the U.S. pretty much the continental borders it has today. The population of the newly acquired lands was relatively small. By the census of 1850, there were over 23 million citizens of the United States, of which less than 400,000 lived in the American West outside the states and territories right along the Mississippi River. After mid-century, the population would grow rapidly as a result of gold and silver strikes and immigrants looking for land to settle in. This led to the need to break up the large territories in the American West into smaller units. The citizens of the West wanted more local control, and the large territories were difficult to govern. In the next lecture in our series, Shaping the American West, we will see how the American West began to be divided into smaller political units, from mid-century to the beginning of the Civil War. Thank you for viewing this lecture about the changing American West between 1845 and 1848. We hope you found it enjoyable and informative. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to get in touch. If you would like to see a selection of original antique maps, please visit our website at pps-west.com.